This is The Download from Sounds Profitable, your daily source for the essential news in the business of podcasting. I'm Gavin Gaddis. Here's what you need to know for today, Thursday, July 30th. First up, the Podcast Atlas Part 5, the best real estate to own in podcasting. Concluding the 5-part series covering the Podcast Atlas, Tom Webster looks at the Humble Podcast newsletter. The data shows newsletters act as the one piece of real estate a creator actually owns. Unlike a platform feed or a social account, a permission-based email list gives a direct, two-way line to its audience, one that survives algorithm changes and does not hand listener data to an intermediary. Webster frames that access as a responsibility as much as an asset. Quote, "A newsletter is how a creator earns the gift of an email address, and if you're going to ask someone for that gift, you owe it to them to honor it." End quote. Next up, what podcasters can learn from the sports social industry about selling their shows. In a new Sounds Profitable Thought Leadership article, Mondometrics founder Nick Cicero discusses how podcasters undervalue social clips, treating them as revenue walking out the door rather than as inventory. Sports teams solved the same problem a decade ago, building owned original content around their core properties and then packaging clip distribution alongside full episode integration in a single sponsorship deal. Cicero argues clips are a top-of-funnel placement that routes audiences towards premium content, not a substitute for it. Next up, Ofcom Media Nations 2026 details UK podcast and speech audio listening. UK media regulator Ofcom released its annual Media Nations 2026 study, and podcasting runs throughout it, with Pod News reporting the word podcast appears 135 times. Ofcom finds 53% of UK adults listen to speech audio such as podcasts or talk radio, that people aged 25 to 34 have the highest reach across speech, radio, podcasts, and audiobooks, and that YouTube is now the most used platform for any audio content. On ad load, only 45% of UK listeners feel there are too many adverts in the podcast they hear, a comparatively advertiser-friendly reading. The full Ofcom report is available for free download, linked in today's issue. Next up, Steve Goldstein, the download built podcasting, now it's holding it back. Goldstein writes a new guest piece for Rain News, reviewing the recent AMP Accords. According to Goldstein, the download has become an obsolete metric that measures file delivery rather than listening and can inflate audience figures by as much as 50%. Goldstein advocates moving podcasting onto verified impression-based metrics, comparable to television, not podcasting, they are podcasting, comparable to television and digital video, which he says would let podcasts compete on the same dashboards as other media and could bring in an additional $1 to $2 billion in ad revenue. His summary of the case, quote, "Better data, more dollars. That's the whole case," end quote. And for our final top story, SiriusXM is using sports to escape the broad bundle trap. SiriusXM will launch a $5 per month sports pass on September 1st, packaging all NFL, MLB, NBA, and NHL games, motorsport, and other live events, local Audacy stations such as WFAN and 94 WIP, ESPN Radio, Fox Sports Radio, and Westwood One, plus hundreds of sports channels and podcasts. Inside Audio Marketing notes the tier also folds in Audacy's local sports stations and Good Karma Brands KSPN Los Angeles. In covering this story, the Streaming Wars frames the move as SiriusXM isolating one of the strongest engagement categories and pricing it as an entry-level product to reach listeners who would not buy a full subscription, a shift that pulls podcasts into satellite radio's tiered monetization. As for the rest of the news, iHeart Australia has made video podcast available in its app, delivered through existing RSS workflows at no cost to creators or publishers, with the feature expected to reach other iHeart territories. Oxford Road's The Media Roundtable podcast runs an AMP Accords deep dive with Pod News editor James Cridlin, walking through the play definition, exposure data requirements, and Apple and Overcast adoptions problem. Joan Keary was named the exclusive brand partnership representative for Startups Decoded with Andy Walsh, handling sponsorship across the show's podcast, video, social, and newsletter channels. Triton Digital released its June 2026 Canada Podcast Ranker, where CBC/Radio Canada's Front Burner, World Report, and The World This Hour again sweeping the top three, with CBC and Radio Canada holding the number one network sales spot with 2.1 million average weekly download. Motherkind, Zoe Blaskey's UK podcast on motherhood with more than 9 million downloads, has joined the Bauer Media Network and will begin live audience recordings in September. MRI Simmons' annual podcast study finds monthly U.S. podcast listening reached 89 million adults, up 36% in 5 years, with 89% of listeners now also watching video podcasts. And Digiday breaks down the logistics behind Unilever's claim that it works with 300,000 creators. That does it for today's issue of The Download. You can click the link in the show notes to be taken to today's episode post on our website, which has every link to every story I just talked about. You can also subscribe to the newsletter version of the show to get it sent straight to your inbox every day. For Sounds Profitable, I'm Gavin Gaddis. Today's issue was produced by myself, Brian Barletta, Molly Demillier, and Tom Webster. For Sounds Profitable, I'm Gavin Gaddis, and we'll see you tomorrow morning for the Download Recap.